Before we go into the summary, I'm going to be briefly explaining some of the main characters in 1984. So, the main character of the novel is named Winston Smith, and he works at the Ministry of Truth, where he alters historical records to match government propaganda. And he appears like an obedient citizen from the outside, but in his own home, he has a journal where he writes things like "Down with Big Brother," and he's very rebellious and wants to overthrow the government. Another character is Julia. She also works at the Ministry of Truth with Winston. She becomes his lover after passing him a note, and she shares his sentiment, but she's more childlike in nature, which is seen through her note passing. Another main character is O'Brien. Winston is unsure of whether or not O'Brien is a friend or an enemy, but he begins to see O'Brien more as a friend, or at least an ally. Winston proclaims his hatred for the party. He receives a book, and all of this turns out to be a ploy, and O'Brien becomes Winston's main torturer, and is brainwashed into believing that the government is good. Big Brother is also an important figure, at least. We're not sure if this figure actually exists, but it's at least a public persona, and Big Brother is the figure that the government uses to basically watch all the citizens. And then one last important figure is Emmanuel Goldstein, and he's Oceania's top enemy. He's a former party member who leads the Brotherhood to fight against Big Brother.
1984 by George Orwell is a dystopian novel about a totalitarian communist regime named Oceania. It follows Winston Smith, a normal government worker in the Ministry of Truth, which is ironically named due to the fact that all they do is fabricate lies in order to perpetuate the system of English socialism. Winston harbors unorthodox ideas that would be deemed thought crimes, as they go contrary to the teachings and ideas of English socialism. These thought crimes could cause him to be arrested, tortured, and/or killed. With Winston writing these ideas down, he's treading into dangerous territory, and along this way, he discovers a woman who at first he suspects might be part of the thought police, but eventually finds out is another person that holds unorthodox ideas. Julia, who also works in the Ministry of Truth, convinces Winston to have a love affair with her in order to rebel against the system of English socialism, which has pretty much banned all pleasure in order to control the people. Winston also kind of suspects that a man named O'Brien, who is a member of the Inner Party, might have unorthodox ideas, and eventually Julia and him are approached by O'Brien, who gives them a book and convinces them that he is a part of a secret organization called the Brotherhood that is trying to take down Big Brother. In one of their meetups, Julia and Winston are surrounded by the thought police in the upstairs room of a shopkeeper who they thought they could trust, and are arrested. Then Winston is tortured by O'Brien and the thought police in the Ministry of Love, and he is eventually forced to betray his love for Julia, and the novel finally ends with Winston being a man who, because of the torture and how he was broken, ends up professing his love for the system and the love for Big Brother, and having pretty much done nothing that affected the totalitarianism and the total oppression of Oceania and Big Brother.
So one of the most significant symbols in this book is the Golden Country, which represents a utopia, juxtaposing the dystopian novel as a dystopia. Is it the opposite of a utopia? And so Winston is wanting a lot of natural rights, and as we see these natural rights, we often think of our United States documents because they were influenced by Enlightenment thinkers. So When we see that, we think about the American dream. A lot of people outside of America had this idea that America is going to be this perfect world in which they can pursue all of their dreams. And a lot of times in history, we see that's not exactly true. They were always held back by something, whether it be societal standards or laws or whatever it may be. And so it's Winston's want to be completely free, and but we see in society that can never be achieved, and we also see that when Winston can never achieve that. Another significant symbol that we see is Winston's varicose ulcer. This comes up in the beginning of the novel, and if you research varicose ulcers, what will come up is that they are something that causes blood not to be able to flow back up into your heart. And so when Winston is repressing feelings of sexual desire, freedom, any type of those natural desires that we talked about, when he represses those feelings, it essentially gives him like a spiritual varicose ulcer. So it allows us to see the dehumanization that the party causes, because over time Winston just becomes less and less human from this repression, and eventually he will get broken down and become very loyal to Big Brother. So the majority of Winston's job is to take old documents that have been deemed incorrect by Big Brother and to burn them up in something called memory holes. And so after these documents have been burned, they can just change the past. So whenever Winston does this, it's significant because they're called memory holes, and it shows that Big Brother can just do whatever they want to. They have unlimited power. So even memories aren't one's own. They own nothing. They don't even own their minds. And so whenever later Winston says, like, they can't change our minds or our feelings, they can. They don't own anything. And so yeah, it just shows the power that Big Brother has and symbolizes that.
So now I'm going to talk about some themes that occur throughout the novel. One of them, the biggest one, is totalitarianism. That's a big theme because Orwell originally wrote 1984 to warn Western nations about the dangers of communism. So throughout the whole story, Winston and all of Oceania struggles with the government being extremely totalitarian, and it's so oppressive that all the citizens are basically equivalent to slaves, and it's a big thing that Winston tries to escape, but obviously. Another big theme is manipulation and control, obviously because of the way the government is. All of the citizens are under constant control of the government, and that's what Winston was trying to get away from. It's what Julia was feeling like she was escaping throughout the whole thing, and in the end obviously they couldn't get away from it, but it's still a big theme because of the struggle that they had with it. Another one is language, and that's because the party in 1984 used different forms of language and lack thereof to basically control the population with things like newspeak and doublethink. Those were used to like control the way the population spoke, and the fact that people's thoughts could be incriminating was a way that they used language to inhibit the population. Another is identity, and that's a theme because it's so stripped from the citizens, and Winston and Julia kind of find it together in the middle, and this is the theme as well, like it's stripped away from them. In the end, citizens just were not allowed to have an individual life, and they had to think all the same thoughts. They weren't allowed to believe anything different, or else they would be prosecuted. And the last really major theme is sexuality and love, because sex for pleasure or as an act of love was like expressly forbidden, and Winston and Julia kind of found that together, but it didn't work out for them, just like everything else, and they were brutally punished for it.
So even though the book 1984 seems like it was written a really long time ago, as time continues to pass, it has interesting societal implications, such as the proles in the book are just the normal people in society who don't really pay attention to the power and the influence that the party has, and that can be seen in society today in that many people don't really know how our government works and really how they control our lives and what we consume. And that's also seen in the book 1984 through rations and the music that they're allowed to sing. And then inside the government in 1984, the party listens in on their party members with telescreens, and they have other members in the party basically acting as spies to turn other people in to essentially protect themselves. And even though we're not members of the party and we're long past that point in time, the government can listen in on everything that we do with our phones, with at-home conveniences such as Alexa or Google Home, and our internet usage, and especially with teenagers with our social media use and what we look up. The government can see what we enjoy and tailor like ads and such things to our interests. So there's really no limit to what they can do with that power. And even though that seems really strange, the government isn't always telling us the full truth, and that's whether that be in the book or whether that be in society now. And it's really crazy how as time continues to progress, this book becomes more and more real, even though at that point in time it was really far-fetched